In these processes, we are going to look at different ways on how new words are formed in a language. Yeah, just as I've said, that we are going to observe, or we are going to look at different processes or different ways on how new words are formed in a language. The question could be, why do we have to form new words? We form new words simply because the need of communication forced us to do so. And sometimes the physical reality, the experiences that we come across with, in one way or another, it is the one that make us to form these new words so that we can communicate whatever experiences that we come across. The lesson that we're going to have will be guided with a question that reads. So the question reads, how are words formed in a language? From this question, we can have several other questions depending on the process of word formation that is going to be applied in the discussion. So, what are these processes? For example, invention is one of the processes of word formation. Now, it being a process of word formation, what happens and how is a new word formed by using invention? The invention has to do with a person coming across with a new thing. You discover something new, or you make something new which never had existed before. So as a process of word formation, a new word under this process is formed when people or when a person has discovered a new object or a new concept in a society. So the discovery of a new object, it cannot just go blank. That discovery or that object or concept had to be given a word so that when people want to refer it, it becomes easier as they communicate. So a new word under this process is formed as a result of the discovery of the new object and or the new concept that had never existed before in that society. So that new object will be given a name, or there'll be a word that goes together with that new object or concept. And this discovery, it can be as a result of this science and technology, and or when people are engaged in different activities as they're trying to simplify their living. Remember, an idea comes after the object being discovered. So this is what and how new words can be formed in a language through invention. But within the same process, people went further, saying that there are times you can have a new experience that you want to explain, but you have failed probably to come across with a new word that could match with that new experience. So people tend to use the existing word which are in the language, and what they do, they give an additional meaning to that concept. So in that case, you'll find one word having more than one meaning, and those meanings are in fact not related completely. For example, if I may give, you have the word pupil. A word pupil, in our normal understanding, this is a school-going child. We call it a pupil. But the word pupil has been given an additional meaning, and which is part of an eye. So when you look at part of an eye and a school-going child, those two meanings, they are completely not related, but they are referred by the same element. So when we have, or when you come across to such an extent, that is what we call semantic broadening. That the word has been broadened its meaning. And technically, they call it neologism. So neologism is the act of making a word having more than one meaning, and those meanings are in fact not related. So this invention, as we are discussing, you can have other people refer the same element as coining. And as for this new experience, I have mentioned what is called neologism. Neologism, as you explain, you might talk about it similar to the way you mentioned invention. But technically, this one has to do with the broadening of the meaning that a word is going to experience. That is how a new word is formed through invention. And this is something that cannot be inevitable, because all the days people are doing whatever they do to make their life simple. So as they are doing so, they are coming with a lot of new discoveries. You have another process called onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a process that has to do with imitation, mimicking of sounds. As a process now, when we want to form new words, how does this apply? That a new word under this process is formed when a human being imitates the sounds or the cries that are made by the object, or the cries and or the sounds that are made by an animal. So anything which is not human, that it produces a certain kind of a sound or a cry. But if a human being has such an ability to imitate that sound or that cry, and as a result, that cry that has been imitated is presented in form of a word, and as we keep on using it, and finally being it included in our vocabulary, then we say that word has been formed through onomatopoeia. For example, the word TikTok. This word TikTok, it is as a result of the sound which is produced by the arrow of a clock or of a watch as it goes like tick-tock, tick-tock. So a clock is sometimes been named as a tick-tock because of the sound it produces as the arrows move. That could be number one. Maybe again, look at the word ding dong, as it stands for a bell. Remember how it rings. When you ring a bell, so it is ding dong, ding dong. So that kind of imitation of the sound, a human being has been able to imitate. We have a word which represents that sound. And such kind of words, they are said to have been formed as a result of the onomatopoeia as a process. So the new words, we are in fact calling them onomatopoeic words. So these words, ding dong, tick tock, they are called, or they are referred as onomatopoeic words. Words that has been formed as a result of the imitation of the sounds and or cries that are produced by the object and or by an animal. Another process of word formation is clipping. Clipping, it has to do with removing. You cut, you shorten. That's what it means simply. But as a process of word formation now, how do we form words? How words are formed through this process? A new word is formed through this process of clipping by first of all having a word in a language. But after having that word, what happens? When you have a word, and this word, in most cases, they are long. So as a clipping applies, that word has to be shortened, has to make it short. How do you make it short? You make it short by omitting and or by removing some syllables within that word. And the syllables that are going to be removed, or the syllables that are going to be omitted, they can either be at the beginning of that word and or at the end of that word. So the removal can happen at the beginning or at the end of the word, and or sometimes it can happen at both ends. Let's see this example. Let's look at those three words and try to exemplify how the shortening happens. That when you come across with people as they talk in their normal conversation, you find some say, "Can you give me your phone?" Instead of talking about telephone. So the word telephone, it is nowadays being referred by just phone when people are in a conversation. Or when you come across with a photographer, then you'll simply ask for your photo. But the word actually is supposed to be a photograph. And when you come across with a person who say, "Oh, I was suffering from flu," instead of influenza. Now, as you can see, those words, they were long. But as people want to simplify and save time as they speak, they think they don't need to use a lot of syllables as they speak a word which they can converse. So as a result, they make the removal of some of the syllables. Like the first word, they have removed the first syllables, and the second word, they have removed the last syllable, but here again, you have removed the first and the last syllable. You had phone, photo, and flu. So photo, phone, and flu, they are words which have been formed as a result of a clipping process. We have a lot of words which are formed by this clipping, and which I know you also sometimes say, for example, "I am going to the dorm," instead of talking about dormitory. So dorm, it is a clipped form of the word dormitory. You find many people say, "Oh, I'm going to the gym," but actually they are supposed to say they're going to the gymnasium. So what we're trying to say here is these clipped words, they are informal vocabularies, that we are using them in our normal conversation. We are not advised to use them in our serious writings, serious communication, and or presentations. That is clipping. You also have acronymy. Acronymy, it is just like the initial letters. What do you do when you want to form a new word by using this process? How are new words formed through acronym? Here again, what happens that you have a lot of words and you don't want to speak all of them at once, but instead then you want to combine those words. But when you want to combine those words, you also find it is difficult for you to make such a combination. And what you do then, you take the initial letters of all those different words. After taking the initial letters of those words, you put them together or you join them together. And you finally find you have a new word. So, if we are to exemplify how a new word is formed through acronym, we can think of words like National Social Security Fund. You have all those words, but you think now you want to mention them together. And for this, you take the initial letters of those different words and you put them together, and as a result, you form the word NSSF. You have Tanzania Zambia Railway Authority, and you can make all together as TAZARA. Think about World Health Organization. People refers it as WHO. So you can think of having as many acronyms as you can. Words that has been formed as a result of taking the initial letters of different words and you put them together. Now when you take the initial letters of these different words, try to look at those examples of acronyms. The first one, for instance, it has just been formed as a result of the sequence of letters, NSSF. But the second one, you don't talk about TAZARA, but instead you talk about TAZARA. So what I want to say is, words that have been formed through acronymy, some of them, they can be pronounced as words, but others, you can just pronounce them as a sequence of letters. But just to conclude about this, is that these acronyms, some of them, they are locally being used, but others, they are internationally agreed. Because they talk about international organizations, international things, that everybody knows it. When you think about World Health Organization, who doesn't know about it? When you talk about UN, United Nations, who doesn't know about it? But if you have a name of your organization at your local area that you also want to acronymize it, you need, of course, to define it when you're talking to people. You can't just mention it before you elaborate what do those letters stand for. So you have to define it, in other words. That is acronym. You have another process called blending. Blending, it is when two things are put together. You blend them. Now, the question here comes, how are new words being formed by using this process? that a new word is formed when we take part of two different words and you join them together, or part of a word and part of another word, and then you join them together to form a new word, which is called blending. For example, you have the word branch. This word, it is said to be formed as a result of the two words which are breakfast and lunch. Now, breakfast and lunch, these are different kind of meals. This one is served very early in the morning, while this one is served at noon. But there are times people take a meal sometimes before noon and after morning. That type of a food is referred as brunch, which you have now taken part of the word breakfast and part of the word lunch. And when you join them together, you come up with the word brunch. Think of a word motel. This word is a result of the word motor and the word hotel. So part of the word motor is taken and being joined with part of another word which is hotel. And altogether, when you add them, you come up with the word motel. So motel is a new word that has been formed through blending process. What I can conclude from this is that the meaning of these two words, when they're separate, that this word motor has its meaning, while the word hotel has its own meaning. But when you talk about motel, then you find the meaning of the two words have been included in the meaning of the word motel. So the words that have been formed through blending, they are actually including the meaning of both words. The services that you expected to have under this part, and again the services that you expect to have under this part, you can get them all together under a place of motel. That is blending. Part of two different words being joined together to form a new one. Something related to joining is compounding. That here you're no longer taking part of the two words, but actually you're taking the whole word altogether. You take a word, whether it's a word base or a word complete base with some affixation, but here we have to have two words, which these two words, they have to be joined together. When they are joined, they form one entity. And that element is called a compound word. You have a word like yes. You have a word like this, father-in-law. This is a compound word being formed as a result of taking this word and the other word, you join them together. Think about other words like windmill. You have the word wind and the word mill. You join them together. So when you have two words being joined together and form a new word that becomes an entry by itself in a dictionary, we call that and or refer that as a compound one. And differently from blending, that we say the meaning of the two words are included in the new word, but here the answer is no, that the meaning of the two words, or they're not included in a compound word, but rather these compound words have been given the fixed meaning. We'll go into details of these compounds in the next lesson, because there are many more other things that we have to look at. But what we're interested now is try to see what are those processes that the society or that people use to form words in language. So this is one among them. The followed process is reduplicative, which under this process, again, it is more or less similar to the previous one, that you take two words and then you join them together. But the two words that have been used under this process, they are different from the one we used under compounding. What kind of words do we have to use under reduplicative? Here we think of having words which are either similar or with slight difference. We're talking about words which are either similar or having a slight difference, that you join them together. Think about a word like bye-bye. You have two words there. Bye-bye. Two similar words being joined together to form a new word. Think about a word like goody goody. Again, two similar words. Or you talk about the same word have been repeated. But what if you think about a word like zigzag? A word like crisscross. Here we're talking about having two words with a slight difference, and this slight difference is only on one sound segment. It could either be a vowel or a consonant. This is another process of how a new word is formed. And actually, the words that are formed through this process, as you can see them, they are said to be childish vocabularies. That the vocabularies that we are not supposed and that we are not allowed to be using them in our serious communication. Because some of them, they are of nonsense. They don't have any complete meaning that they provide in our societies. When, for example, somebody has done something rubbish, they say, oh, that is walkie-talkie. You mean that is nonsense. That is reduplicative. Apart from that, we have another process of word formation which is referred as affixation. Affixation has to do with having a word and you fix other elements. When you fix those other elements, what do? You attach them. That attachment can either be at the beginning or at the end. Think about a word like this. This is a word. And out of this, you can have the word unkind. You can have the word kindly. And you can also have unkindly altogether. So the attachment of these elements at the beginning and at the end This all together, it is referred as affixation. So in language, actually, we have a lot of words like this. Either we want to add meaning to the word that we have, either we want to change the word class of the original word, and or you simply want to make it look different from the other. There are details of how the attachment can be done in a word, which I'm asking you to stay tuned, because we are going to have this later in the coming lesson. So at the time being, I simply want you to know that you can have a word, and out of that word, there is a possibility for you to form a new word by having an attachment of an element, it either being at the beginning or at the end. Think of even a word like boy. You can add that other element, boyhood, and many more other examples. As I said, we'll see it again in the next lesson, because that's where we're going to have some details about this affixation as a process. But right now, what I'm trying to do is I want to show you how new words are formed in a language. Through these processes, you ask yourself, how are new words formed in a language? That is affixation. You have conversion. Conversion, in other words, is referred as zero affixation. We have just finished talking about affixation, but here we're talking about zero affixation. Affixation was to do with attaching. What do you have to do under zero affixation? That means no attachment. And if there's no attachment, what happens? That the word has to remain as it is. Now, when it remains as it is, why do we say this is a new word? And also, why have we included it as another process of word formation? Actually, what happens is that the existing word is assigned into a new word class without the attachment of any affix. That you have the word, for instance, as export. And you maybe know that this word is a noun. But the same spelling, it could be a what? It could be a verb. What happens that this word formerly is a noun and now becomes a verb. So here find the same word has been assigned into a new word class without the attachment of any affix. Similarly to the word, for instance, subject, this one could be a noun, and the same thing can be a verb. This one can be a noun, the same thing can be a verb. Think about this one. Export, export, export. Subject, subject. Present, present. What have you noted? That export, I have emphasized the first syllable, and as you heard it being spoken louder. But on the second word, I have emphasized on the second syllable, port. So what happens is that the stress has shifted from the first position to the second position. When a stress shifts in some of the words, it makes that word change from one word class to another word class, and especially from noun to verbs, but not all words. There are some words like this where a stress doesn't shift. And how do you make this a noun and how do you make this as a verb? You say this is abuse. Abuse. And that is abuse. So the change of the final sound from s to z in some of the words, again, it makes a word shift from one word class to another word class. The same, like, for example, we talk about house, house, practice, practice, advice, advise, and such like. That is conversion. Another process of word formation, or another way of how words are formed in a language, it is through back formation. Back formation, as you can read the two words, they talk about making references to the back. How a new word is formed through this. It is believed that there are some words which are formed as a result of some existing word which they were believed to be there before. So it is under this back formation where it is said that a new word is formed by shortening the noun, or by shortening the existing noun to produce a verb. How do you shorten it? Let's look at this example. The two words emotion and television, they are said to be the new word being formed, or the word that were there previously. That after the discovery of either the concept or the object, that's the word. But out of this word, people thought that if this is a noun, that's like other nouns like education, and we were able to form the word educate, then why not possible for this word television to have the word televise? And why not possible for this word emotion to talk about emote? So emote and televise, they are said to be new words formed by back formation. That the assumption is, how can you have a noun before having a verb? And so it is like having a verb, and when you make an attachment of those other affixes, you form a noun, just like other words we saw in noun, like educate, education. But here we say emote and televise are examples of words that have been formed by removing, or you shorten the existing noun to produce a verb. That's another way on how words are formed in a language. Another process called symbolism. Shortly, symbolism has to do with forming, changing, and or creating a new form of a word, and especially from the existing word. What happens? Maybe you take the regular verbs and or the regular nouns, you exempt them. Think about the irregular nouns and the irregular verbs. How do you form the past tense of the irregular verb? How can you form the plural of an irregular noun? You find you don't make an addition of some certain element, but rather a word changes its form. For example, when you have a word like child. It becomes children. Of course, this might not give us a clear understanding, but think about a word like tooth. What's the plural form for this? It becomes teeth. This is a completely new word, different from this one. Talk of a word like sleep. It. What's the past tense of this? Slept, ate, and so many. Now, in forming the plural of some of the irregular nouns, you find the word change its form. The same applies when you look at the past tense of the irregular verb. You completely have a different form of a word, in some of them anyway. But others, as I say, they can remain the same. For example, when you talk about put, what's the past tense of it? It remains as put. So in this case, you cannot rely on that. Some of the irregular verb, as I say. This is symbolism. And those are the processes of which people apply to form new words in a language. But a question someone can ask himself, like, what about borrowing? You haven't mentioned about it. Yeah, good that borrowing, in one way or another, we term it as a process of word formation, though some other people, they don't talk about it as a process of word formation. But I'm obliged to talk about it sometimes in the coming lesson, together with affixation, compounds, and borrowing. I think these three, they need a bit much more elaboration so that people could easily identify and understand how a society can use them to form words, and what happened exactly that new words come into a society as a result of those different processes. So with this discussion, I would want you now to think about the words that you come across with as either you write your essays and or as you use in speaking. How are those words formed? Through all these processes that we have discussed. Let me write about 5, 6, 7 words, and I want you quickly to say which process out of all these that we have discussed that has been applied to form those words. Now look at these words: smog, ashtray, enthuse, seesaw, UNICEF, clockwise, and feet. Now tell me, which process of word formation that has been applied to form these words? Reflect those that we have discussed before. Smog. Which process? Ashtray. Which process? Enthuse. Which process? Seesaw. UNICEF. Clockwise. Fit. Imagine these are new words being formed. Which process of word formation that it has applied to form these words, and especially the one that we have seen all together in our lesson. Thank you very much, my dear students. Keep on watching Darasa online. Expect to see you again in the next lesson, as I said, when we are going to discuss about affixation, borrowing, and compound, as also processes of word formation, as I have touched them here, but they have some more other details that we need to understand. Thank you very much for listening.
kiongozi mkuu wa mapinduzi, bali pia ni mwalimu na baba mwenye kipaji cha ukarimu. Na kuna siyefahamu kwamba yeye ni kiongozi halisi anayeshirikiana nasi katika shida